Then there's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. I ran across an article from several years back about our podcast guest, State Senator Maria Elena Durazo, and the first line in the story proclaims in big capital letters, Maria Elena Durazo is not to be taken lightly. As perhaps provocative as that observation was, it is not an inaccurate profile of our state senator from California's diverse 24th Senate District in the heart of Los Angeles. Maria Elena Durazo has influenced Southern California politics, even politics statewide and nationwide, for decades as a key leader in the labor movement. The daughter of immigrant farm workers, Senator Durazo spent her childhood traveling from Oregon to California, laboring in the fields with her family, and she went on to be the first in her family to attend college. Through her work and leadership of the LA County Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO, and a vice president of Unite Here, a nationwide union for restaurant, hospitality, and casino workers, and now in the legislature, Senator Durazo has always been an outspoken advocate for workers' rights and a tireless adversary against poverty and inequality. And through all of her work in life, as it's been said, flow two closely connected certainties: that this is a nation of immigrants and that labor unions have provided those immigrants with homes, jobs, healthcare, community, and self-sufficiency. And those two touchstones will be some of the theme of our discussion this time around. Senator Durazo is the chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus and is also the chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Corrections, Public Safety, Judiciary, Labor, and Transportation, a full plate with that committee. She has joined us on this podcast a few times in the past, and we are glad to be able to catch up with her early in 2022 on this late winter morning at the Capitol. Senator Durazo, I promise never to take you lightly. Welcome back.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to be on here and have the conversation with you.
It's good to have you here. How are you, by the way? Has 2022 started out for you in a positive way so far? I know it's been budget,
yeah,
too.
We started out thinking, wow, we took down the plexiglass. We had real seatmates. We were just ready and roaring to go forward. And then we get hit again with another surge. And it throws us off as far as our protocols. But we've been through it before, and so we got back on track, and I'm grateful to all the staff, the Secretary Contreras, everyone who has kept us on track and saying nothing will be taken for granted, nothing will be taken lightly.
And I know the work still has to be done. You're dealing with the 22-23 state budget, and with your subcommittee, you're dealing, as I said, with a full plate on a lot of important relative issues.
That's right. Everything from what our budget is for the prison system, for victims of crime, for the incarcerated. How do we go from being incarcerated to getting their lives back on track? And we're investing billions of dollars to be able to do it the right way for all of them and all of their families. So that's just an example. But to me, the most exciting is about our transportation budget. That is really going to create thousands and thousands of jobs, good paying jobs.
And I make light of the proclamation of never taking you lightly, but I know that nowadays there's really no school board member or LA City Council member or Board of Supervisors member, no elected official who considers a major social or economic decision without considering the ramifications for workers or organized labor. And you hold a great influence in the creation of that mindset and those decisions, not just in LA, but all over California. Has your agency over the years, in the arc of your story, it's changed that, but I assume it's been hard-earned.
Well, I think the bottom line was poverty doesn't help anyone. Poverty hurts everyone. And so the way that I would approach it is, and I continue to do it, is a union job gives you the kind of stability that you need. And that carries over to your family. It carries over to your community. It carries over to what kind of education is available. It carries over to whether or not you have health care or don't. I mean, so many things that spill over. So to me, the issue of, and this has been historic, as you said, the issue of having a good paying job for the hard work that you put into this economy, and as a moral issue, We just have to keep at it, and that should be a given for everybody right now.
I would also think, too, is the moral issue is what we've been dealing with the pandemic. When I talked to you last in the fall of 2020 after the election, we were talking about COVID in the Latino community, and there were some glaring health and safety and equity gaps that we were seeing as the pandemic became a reality, and COVID really unraveled the Latino community and other communities of color, affecting many, killing a lot of people in those communities at a really young age. And they were the ones in the community that were the essential workers, the first responders, the farm workers, the nurses, the factory workers, the hospitality workers. And they were not always working for employers who put their health needs as a top priority. But here we are in 2022. Has the landscape changed a bit? Are the equities now starting to, the scale starting to balance? Have the vaccines leveled the playing field in terms of just the health and safety of those in those communities that up until now have been essential but really vulnerable?
I think what we were able to accomplish during the pandemic is to finally get from the testing to the vaccinations themselves out into our communities, to our senior communities, to our children as far as we could. Frankly, with regards to the economic disparities, we have not really dealt with that in an ongoing way. We're starting to. Our paid sick leave was a very important step to make sure that working people had the opportunity to not go to work if they were sick, and not have to sacrifice paying the rent or buying food for that month. So I think the economic inequalities are still very much in our state, but we started to grapple with the health care. And in addition to that was, of course, our expansion of Medi-Cal to more immigrants.
I know that you have been in the fight with that issue for a couple of years now, and this 2022 budget plans to remove all immigration status, am I correct, for Medi-Cal health care? Talk about that issue, how you've worked this out this year, and the past victories and the hard work incrementally leading up to this point.
Well, let me just mention when Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara was senator, he started the year before he left with how do we include all Californians in the Medi-Cal, in having access to health care, and he accomplished the 0 to 18 years of age. And he asked me if I would take up the baton and keep that going. And sure enough, we did with our Health for All, the coalition on the ground. And we were able to get the next group from 18 to 26. And then this last year, the governor supported the 50 and over years. And now the governor has included in this budget all Californians, regardless of their status. If you're low income, you have a right to Medi-Cal. And very, very critical step. So all will be included, just like any other Californian. We want to up the coverage, the timing of that, and not wait 2 years. But I'm very grateful that the governor has now included it. It's a question of when, not if. And the bottom line is, it doesn't help any Californian, it doesn't help any community to think that somehow excluding entire communities from health care is going to benefit us. How does that do us any good? The pandemic should have taught us a lesson that unless everybody is getting the vaccination, we all hurt. We all are impacted in a bad way. So having health care for everybody helps. It helps on the moral issue. It's just a human right. It helps on the economic issue because it's much cheaper to get preventative health care than it is for that person to develop worse symptoms and a more chronic version of that, of an illness. So it doesn't make any sense for us to exclude anybody. And the bottom line is they are contributing just as much as any other Californian. And so there's zero reason to exclude anybody from the healthcare system.
Let's talk about some of your legislative successes from this last year. One banner piece of legislation that you have been working on for quite a while, SB 62, the Garment Worker Protection Act. It's law. It's just the beginning. Explain how this will benefit the garment workers in LA in particular, which is one of the biggest centers for the garment industry, but also hold the manufacturers and the retailers accountable.
Well, there are two key pieces. There are several others, but the two predominant pieces to the legislation are, one is to address piece rate. For The entire existence, I think, of the garment industry, piece rate was used so that you get 8 cents for sewing on a sleeve or 10 cents for sewing on a collar or waistband. That led to enormous exploitation.
Absolutely, because cumulatively, it's hardly a working wage itself.
Exactly. And it was a constant change. So today, the employer would say, well, I'll pay you 5 cents to sew on the sleeve, and then tomorrow decide to change it. And so it was a tactic to do sort of a speed up, as is done in factories, and it never made it clear to the employees what they were getting and would they ever add up to a minimum wage. So it was a very dirty tactic. We got rid of that, and we're really glad that that was included. The second part is to go upstream in the chain of production and hold the brands as accountable as the direct employer, the direct contractor of those workers, because they, in fact, decide how much is going to be paid for the full shirt or blouse or dress. They decide that. And they're the ones who then say to the contractor, this is what you're going to get. You figure it out. Mm-hmm. So they have everything to do with how much is paid. They have everything to do with how much is earned, and they are now going to be held accountable.
And from what I understand, too, the industry for decades has passed the buck and the accountability to the subcontractors and said, hey, we're not the ones violating laws. We're not the ones paying these wages. So now it holds everybody equally accountable.
Exactly.
Right?
Not more, not less, but equally accountable. And I heard that many, many times. But we had so many businesses, small businesses, women-owned businesses, businesses of people of color who said, no, the problem is not those contractors. They're part of the problem. But the other part of the problem is that you don't give them enough money, and therefore they turn around and take it out of the pockets of the workers.
And so now your continued work, which is not yet done, is training workers and knowing their rights, giving them the agency to speak up, and also educating the industry to let them know they are on notice.
That's exactly right. And I'm grateful to our labor commissioner because she's doing an extraordinary job of reaching out to employers, making sure that they know what their responsibilities are, reaching out to the workers. The Garment Workers Center is set up with their teams of people so that they could educate their co-workers. But more than anything, they will be supported and backed up by our government, and that we're going to put those kinds of resources into making sure that this law is respected.
Your fight for this bill really is part of the tapestry of your career. You have protested with these workers, and not just these workers, the garment workers, but so many other workers in the past, whether it was the New Otani Hotel that you dealt with back in the 80s and 90s, that was a while back, but just even up to now, you've joined picket lines, you've been arrested a few times in solidarity with these workers. I think even last fall I saw pictures of you in handcuffs. No one can say you don't walk the walk with these workers. Talk about that dynamic of, I'm not just going to author this law, I'm going to be out there in the trenches with you.
Well, I think, everybody's got a personal story that connects us to what we end up doing in life. And for me, it was watching my parents and my sisters and brothers all together work as hard as we could, and most of the time didn't make enough for us to have a roof over our head the way we should have. We lived out of a flatbed truck many, many times. We had to go to the local church and ask for food. And this was still after working hard every single day. I would go to school later, than when school started. I would leave the school year before it ended. And why? Why was that? So I always questioned that, and that's what led me to be proud of housekeepers who said, cleaning 20 rooms means I can't take a break, means I can't stop for lunch. We got to do something about it. Their courage is what inspires me every single day. I get so proud of being next to these garment workers, these farm workers, and nurses. They're just in every industry. And to me, that's what motivates me in my work. There's no reason to be up here unless there are, especially women, who work hard, willing to fight for themselves and their kids, That's what moves me. And every time that I can do something next to them, not in front of them, not behind them, but shoulder to shoulder with them, I get sort of very emotional about it.
Absolutely. It's obviously a personal mission. And even the fight for health care for immigrants through Medi-Cal, that's a personal mission too, right?
Absolutely. You mentioned getting arrested. I got arrested dozens of times. Most of the time, it was around health care. And so this is a continuation. That was in the labor movement. That was in negotiations with employers. This is for those who don't have the ability to negotiate because they don't have the power, the equal power with employers. But it is about them having a basic human right. So we're going to continue this as long as it takes.
Well, you mentioned women, and should we note here, as others have, that is it not a coincidence that California's boldest and most innovative workplace laws in the last year have come from women legislators, 4 of them, you and Senator Gonzalez and Senator Leyva and former Assemblymember Gonzalez. So it's mujeres power here, right?
That's right. Well, I think it's a matter of what our experiences were, and therefore we're going to take that experience and do something about it here at the legislature.
Globally, or if here in our capital world globally, the Legislative Latino Caucus, Victories for 2021, civic engagement, diversity, economic equity, was the agenda that the caucus put forward last year with you as president. Has that been successful in what you got out of the legislature and what was passed?
Well, we mentioned one of those successes, which was the health insurance for undocumented Californians, the amount of money that was put into broadband that had specifically identified communities, poor communities and communities of color. Senator Gonzalez led that with Assemblymember Aguiar Curry, $6 billion that will be invested in that. Retention rights for hospitality workers, construction workers, to make sure that the laws that protect them are really enforced. So we're really proud that we have a very comprehensive package, because Latino legislators are not just concerned about Latino Californians. That's 40% of the population, but the other 60% is just as important to us as it is to anybody else.
Right. Well, moving forward to 2022, what is the caucus's priorities moving forward for this year?
Well, we haven't engaged in that conversation yet, but if I may, there's a couple of things that I would be putting forward. For example, to pick up on the paid family leave and disability insurance benefits, we have to do a better job of increasing the wage replenishment formula that's used. For a minimum wage worker to get 60% of their wages to take paid family leave or disability, if they confront that, they'll never do it. So in fact, low-wage workers are subsidizing higher paid workers who then have the higher wage, they have the whatever the percentage is, they then take advantage of this because we all put into it. Everybody puts into it. This is not employer paid. But the fact that their wage replenishment is such a small percentage, we have to increase the percentage to make sure that all workers, including low-wage workers, take advantage of the paid family sick leave. For you, for 2022, I know you specifically have your name on a bill, SB 731, that would end unjust employment discrimination for people with criminal histories. And I know the United States arrests, convicts, and incarcerates a greater percentage of its population than any other nation. And most employers out there, some could say you might understand this, they don't want somebody with a criminal record in their workplace, except those folks represent this staggeringly high, especially nowadays, workforce. So talk about how you're trying to level that playing field and reduce that divide between those people that have records but can still work. Well, I think there's definitely, we're in the middle of a change of employers' attitudes. The Greater LA Chamber of Commerce is in support of SB 731. There are a few things that are legitimate that we have to address, jobs that have to do with children, and so how do we make sure that there's a protection there, education. So we're dealing with that. But the bottom line is this. Californians are investing billions and billions of dollars to help our incarcerated, former incarcerated, be in a position to rehabilitate, get back on track, They want to. We're investing in them. But then we will turn around and say, but when you get out, even though you've gotten degrees inside, you've even gotten as far as a BA degree, when you get out, we have thousands of restrictions. So you're really not going to be able to get reintegrated into the community because of all these limitations that are put on you, including where you live, what kind of job, and whether or not you can be a coach to your kids' team. I mean, how do we expect all of those men and women who, by the way, many of them were just arrested and not convicted, but that arrest record follows you for the rest of your life. Right. We have to be smarter about this. We are really committed to rehabilitation, but we can't continue to have this burden on them, which goes on for 100 years. That's how long these records will go on. So we want to sunset them in a very organized, in a way which doesn't, by the way, doesn't mean that we're letting criminals out of prison. They've already served their time. They've already done whatever was required of them. All we want to do is give them the full opportunity
and
to
reintegrate. To that point, are we surprised then when there's high rates of recidivism, when you have somebody coming out of prison with no options, no resources, no outlets, and possibly what's their alternative is reoffending?
Right. And it's not to say it's okay, but we close the doors on them when they get out over and over and over again, and that's not going to work. So don't be surprised by the results if we close the doors on them.
Any other banner legislation for this year you're moving forward?
Well, one thing I want to make sure that we address is, as you know, there is a lot of rental debt that was accumulated during the pandemic, and we took steps, the state took steps to provide assistance both to landlords and to tenants, but there is a massive amount of accumulation. I want to make sure that the practices of collecting that money are similar, are the exact same that we use for consumer debt collection. And there's protections that we want in there. We don't want people harassed. We don't want them threatened. We don't want all that taking place while those families are trying to figure out how to pay that debt. Let's not let bad practices be used against them. So we want to make sure these tenants have the ability to pay that debt back without being harassed and threatened.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the things we need to deal with, which also becomes very personal as well, is climate change and environmental justice. I saw a headline this morning, right from the break of dawn, that the dangers of climate change are mounting so rapidly that they could soon overwhelm our ability to adapt, from a UN report. Shocking, but not surprising. And as we deal with the effects of climate change going forward, rising sea levels, the heat, the wildfires, many lower income communities and communities of color can be and are being adversely affected or ignored in the policies of change. And you think, well, rising sea level, that just affects people on the coast. How do we ensure a continued focus on environmental justice for communities of color as well as just all of us globally?
Well, I think we have to always make sure that there's not some unintended consequence here for our bills that look great, and they may be doing some good. But for example, if you buy a zero emissions vehicle, electric vehicle, it costs 25% more in electricity bills for a non-homeowner. Okay? My district is almost 80% renters. Mm-hmm. That means they would be paying 25% more in electricity because they're in a building that doesn't have that direct connection. How do they do it? Where do they plug that car in to get the electricity? Right now, fossil fuel jobs pay far more than the quote-unquote green jobs. Those green jobs are not bringing home the green to the workers, to the men and women who do that work. So we have to make sure that there's justice, not only in making sure that we have clean air, that we have clean land, that we have clean water. Do you know that there are 1 million Californians right now who do not have access to clean and safe water?
Absolutely, yes.
So, as we go forward with our goals, our climate goals, let's make sure we don't continue to leave millions of people behind, or that we're not doing any kind of policy that is going to hurt or leave more people behind. So that's a very, very explicit attention that we have to give to all of our climate change challenges.
Well said. Speaking of justice, in a positive sense, President Biden just nominated Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to be the first African-American female judge on the U.S. Supreme Court. And our own Governor Newsom has secured the appointment of Justice Patricia Guerrero as the first Latina on the California State Supreme Court. Give us your reaction and significance of both of these appointments and nominations, particularly just in the context of, again, balancing the scales.
Well, I'm very excited. I know everyone that I talk to is very excited. 2 women of color to the highest courts. I mean, the impact that California's Supreme Court has on the rest of the nation. So Justice Guerrero is going to be in a great place to continue to lift California. And Justice Jackson will just be another extremely exciting first African American, and women. So we need not only people of color, but we need women as well. When Ruth Ginsburg was asked how many more women, would be fair, and she said all of them.
All of them, yes, yes. Well, particularly in California, where there's just such a tremendous disparity of not only female representation, but also Latino representation on the courts versus the populations that they serve.
Right.
Tremendous disparities in California.
In California, with 40% of the population Latino, we've never had more than 1 Latino on the California Supreme Court. So again, we're grateful that Governor Newsom has taken this step, and we look forward to more people of color, more Latinos on the court.
Justice Guerrero's appointment reminds us that investing in Latinas is investing in the future. Hundreds of thousands of Latinas dropped out of the workforce over the past year or so, forced to leave the labor market because of a safety net that just caved on them during the pandemic, and many of them already spending 1/3 of their income on childcare, and then they had to stay home when schools and daycares closed. How can we better invest in and empower Latinas and families post-pandemic into the future? It's fantastic on the macro level to have these justices in place, but for the working mom out there, the working Latina mom, what does this mean?
Well, I think we have to more directly and aggressively address poverty. Minimum wage is not sufficient, anywhere near sufficient. We have hundreds of thousands of families that are pre-homeless. They're right on the brink of homelessness. And while we try to deal with homelessness on the one hand, thousands are becoming homeless at the same time. So what is at the heart of that is how much do they make? Can they pay these rents? And of course, we have to address the housing shortage, no doubt about it. But it's not a housing shortage. It's an affordable housing shortage. And we still are not putting the emphasis on affordable housing when that is the need.
Yes.
That's the need. There's enough to some degree of market rate, but affordable housing is the key word there. And the ability to be able to pay your rent. And are you ever going to be in a position to buy a home? I mean, that's generational wealth. That means a lot for dealing with poverty, because then the children, sons and daughters of the parents, will have something to lean on, and it goes on, or else it goes in the opposite direction of nothing but poverty. So I think that should be our goal. I think that should be connected. We can connect it with environmental justice issues. Yes. We have the ability, the state of California, especially now with this budget, to invest in the creation of good-paying jobs. We don't have to rely on fossil fuel jobs. We have the ability to make sure, just as President Biden has says, how about good-paying union jobs? He's very explicit about that, because we know that's the only way to guarantee they will be good jobs. That's what built the middle class in this country. So I think we shouldn't shy away from that. We've got to be explicit.
As you talk about this, it just reminds me of the emotional toll that all of this accumulatively, the toll it takes on so many families, Latino families, communities of color, low-income communities. There was a Spanish word I saw for the first time this weekend. It was desahogar, which I think means to vent, but in the bigger context, it means undrowning, to be able to relieve yourself of this stress and this emotion and this hurt and this pain. So in addition to legislation and policy, by extension, we like to think that somewhere in there, there's some relief, some desahogar in this process.
I'm going to have you write some speeches for me. It's beautiful. That's exactly right. Communities want to be able to move on. They want to be able to move forward. And part of that is the relief that's needed, both emotional as well as physically, right? Materially, being able to count on certain things. And to think that so many millions of kids don't have access to the digital, that's shocking for a state like California. So we got to take those real core issues and just do something about it.
Legislative victories for unions and Latino workers, comprehensive medical coverage for immigrants, and workers that are just fed up, and the striking and the protesting, they're speaking out more and more over these years. You're trying to bridge the digital divide. More persons of color in positions of influence. Latinos are a flourishing force on the ballot, and they're a flourishing force in the voting community. People have to pay attention now. The gap is, we like to think, is starting to close between communities of color, and I think Californians, for the first time since the start of the pandemic, are starting to just pay attention to these things. Does this ascendancy, if you will, does it have the power to sustain?
I think it's more, the question is, does it have the power to continue to make change? And that's not been answered yet in terms of, will all of this power really translate into the things that our communities need? Do farm workers, the right to unionize, how do we make sure that right is respected? We do some things for the garment workers. We do some things. Meanwhile, the leader of Amazon is making billions and billions more. Yes. Millionaires became billionaires at a rate that we had never seen, probably since the robber barons. All of that is still going on. And don't forget, the right to vote is being challenged and undermined across the state as well.
Yes.
How could it be that we're still trying to protect the right to vote? That was something we thought was a settled issue. So as we go around the world and we're saying we support the Ukrainians and outraged by the attack on the Ukrainians, what about in this country? How do we hold up this country on the right to vote, protecting that right, on the right to be able to live and have shelter? Those are things that we have to take care of to a greater degree, and we're trying that, but we got to work harder at that.
And I think remaining vigilant for, as you say, we thought that voting rights was resolved 3 decades ago, right. And here we are again fighting for it. So these are very fragile rights and privileges.
I ran into a friend of mine when I was at St. Mary's College this weekend, and he was reminding me when I was there that we were taking over the chapel at St. Mary's, that we had done a fast yes. there in order to win ethnic studies. Now, I wouldn't normally point out how old I am, but that was 50 years ago. 50 years ago. And today we're still getting challenged on whether or not ethnic studies is
yes.
good for
yes.
this country. So there are some fundamental issues that we still have to grapple with. And while we move forward, those issues are not being resolved in the way that they should be.
It is a pleasure talking about all these fundamental issues with you. I really appreciate your time. On a personal note, that same article from several years ago that said Maria Elena Durazo was not to be taken lightly also noted, and this was a quote, that few people are more determined than Maria Elena Durazo to achieve justice and able to appreciate joy. And I'm going to just assume in some ways joy and justice are synonymous with each other in your life. Is that true? Are joy
yes,
and justice?
Yes, justice is absolutely a joy for me, but so are my 2 granddaughters.
Absolutely.
Sydney and Seneca, I love them just to the max.
Isn't grandparenting a wonderful?
Oh, it's so much fun.
Yes.
Thank
you for your time, Senator Durazo. Appreciate this. Glad to be able to talk about these important issues. I wish you and the Latino Caucus luck this year in moving forward with legislation, and let's do this again sooner than later.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you. State Senator Maria Elena Durazo of Los Angeles, the chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus. That is a wrap for this edition of Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical assistance and production support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulte, Brian Shadden, Rainier Sabiniano, McClenna Woods, Lisa Murphy, Ricardo Sainz Ione, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. On behalf of Senator Maria Elena Durazo of Los Angeles, I'm Brian Green at the State Capitol in Sacramento. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.